Good afternoon, Evergreen. I hope this chapter finds everybody doing well. And speaking of chapters, this is our last one of Fangspew in the Black Pond. Chapter 14. The title of this one is Fangspew and the Spiked Luminoid. Here we go. Bubbles Lime left the pond, looking for Fangspew and T-Moss. She had searched the pond but couldn't find either of them, so now headed up the path toward T-Moss's tree. She found the two of them sitting at the base of the tree, chatting companionably. Actually, T-Moss was chatting. Fangspew was listening and smiling. Bubbles hopped up to join them, picking up T-Moss's recounting of the time that Fangspew accidentally hopped into a pile of deer dropping. T-Moss was enjoying his retelling of the event, interrupting himself to laugh and embellishing parts of the story. In particular, in this retelling, Fangspew landed in the pile with his mouth open. Fangspew didn't remember it happening that way, but it made for a funnier story, and he enjoyed T-Moss's laughter. Additionally, T-Moss acted out the part where Fangspew was trying to get out of the pile without touching anything, without putting his weight down, which is obviously impossible. T-Moss wiggled around trying to get out of the imaginary pile, keeping all of his feet off the ground, both he and Fangspew laughing until Fangspew noticed Bubbles approaching. Fangspew was not interested in Bubbles being reminded of the story. It was funny, sure, but also a bit embarrassing. So he quickly changed the subject. Bubbles, hi, I thought I heard you were going for a swim this morning. Bubbles nodded good morning to T-Moss. I was, but there's news, Fangspew. Bad news. The spiked luminoid is back. Fangspew said, What? T-Moss said, What? Fangspew continued, I thought we got rid of that thing last summer. T-Moss repeated himself, What? The two frogs looked at the gecko and then remembered. Oh, that's right, said Bubbles. You weren't here early in the spring of last year. I forgot. Sorry. T-Moss is younger than the frogs. Fangspew picked up where Bubbles left off. Yeah, you weren't here. We were visited by a spiked luminoid last summer. It was not pleasant. T-Moss said, I've never even heard of a spiked luminoid. What is it? The frogs explained. It's a bird, began Bubbles. But its head looks like that of a lizard, continued Fangspew, with spikes running down the top of its head. It's big, too, about 4 feet wingtip to wingtip. Black, similar in size to a big crow. The spike part of its name comes from its feet, not the spikes on its head. Bubbles looked squeamish as she told this part. It doesn't have regular bird feet. Rather, its legs end in a spike. Where other birds have 3 toes, this one has one straight, sharp spike, used to kill its prey. Fangspew added, But that's not all. Its legs end in a spike, but it also has a barb just above the spike, so it spears its prey, say, a frog, and then takes back off. The barb hooks the frog to keep it from falling off the pike. Horrible, really. The other odd thing about this bird is it has large knees, big and round. They serve as shock absorbers. For the spiked luminoid to kill, it comes swooping down at high speed, flares at the last minute, and then spears its target, its knees absorbing the impact, its barb hooking the target, and then it takes off again. Finally, Bubbles added, its eyes glow. Really, it's scary. It attacks at night, but it's possible to see it coming because its eyes glow like fireflies. And T-Moss, you can exhale, Fangspew reassured him. The reason you've not heard of them is they don't attack geckos. They hunt frogs. If it's possible, T-Moss looked both relieved and concerned at the same time. Relieved for himself, concerned for his friends. As you well know, there are lots of frogs in Florida this time of year, so apparently our spiked luminoid from last year has returned. Fangspew looked over at Bubbles and said, Bubbles, has it killed anything yet? Bubbles looked grim. 2. Last night, late. It took us a while before they turned up missing, then a bit longer to figure out what had happened. It was a luminoid. We could tell by the spike imprints in the ground. T-Moss looked apologetic. Sorry, you guys. What a terrible thing. Bubbles finished the story. So I came here directly to you two. You rid us of the unwanted animal before. Can you do it again? Got any ideas? A long discussion ensued. Topics covered included the animal's strengths, its weaknesses, not many, its hunting tactics, and several impractical ideas that were quickly discarded. Finally, Fangspew looked at T-Moss. Think we can get rid of it? I've got no good ideas. T-Moss looked thoughtful. I've got one. Fangspew, go on. T-Moss, let's make a fake frog, a big one. You said they attack at night, so it doesn't have to be perfect, just big enough to fool a bird in the dark. Same frog color, same frog shape, big enough to lure the luminoid in. We'll make it out of mud, like we humans make sandcastles on the beach, and underneath it we'll hide a big log. Fangspew caught on. That way when it hits the mud frog, the spikes will spear the log, and when it takes off, it'll have a log stuck to its spikes. Brilliant. It can't hurt anyone with a log in its spikes. T-Moss, you're a genius. Now, you need to understand when they mean by a big log. You are thinking of a log maybe 4 feet long, perhaps a foot in diameter. That'd be too large for frogs and a gecko. Rather, think in terms of a smallish stick. That will give you the correct idea. It should also tell you that this plan won't work. The spiked luminoid will have no problem with a little stick, even if it spears it. It probably won't, very small target, but if it does, it'll likely split the log in two. Not much of a problem for a big bird. But Fangspew and Timos didn't know this. They're fired up at this idea, full of energy and optimism. They assign responsibilities. Timos, directs Fangspew, you got the mud frog. Your hands are far better for that type of thing than ours. I'll go get a good stick. I can use my hind legs to push it to the beach, and there you'll build the frog on top of it. Bubbles, line up some volunteers for tonight. We'll need them to hide and croak. The croaking will call in the luminoid, but they better be well hidden. We'd hate to have them calling the luminoid on themselves. Maybe place them under bushes around the site, leaving Mud Frog in the open by itself. Okay. Any questions? None. The friends split up, hurrying. Fangspew hopped back along the path, looking for a log. He finds one. Takes him quite a while to push it to the Mud Frog site. He had to plant his front feet, then use his hind legs to push it, moving it several inches at a time. In that manner, moving backward the entire way, he got it to the pond. Slow work indeed. It was about 6 inches long and 2 inches in diameter. Meanwhile, Timos had selected a mud frog site in the clearing on the north side of the pond. He began to gather piles of dirt, wet the piles down with handfuls of water, making sticky mud. By the time Fangspew shows up, hot and tired with the stick, Timos is ready. Bubbles had gathered 6 of her brothers and sisters, explained the plan and the danger, and gone with each of them to pick out a good hiding spot. Now, there's a point here I must emphasize. Frogs croak at night, as you know. Most folks, however, are under the impression that frogs croak at night to attract mates. There may be a bit of truth in that, but that's not the primary reason. The primary reason frogs croak at night is because they're looking at the stars. Seriously, frogs find great beauty in the stars, and most every clear night gather to comment and admire them. They think they're a beautiful part of God's handiwork. Hey, you guys see the Big Dipper over there? Really bright tonight. See it? And there's the 7 sisters. Look how clear they are. You can see all 7. They're talking, but to you and I, and the luminoid, we hear croaking. The spiked luminoid knows all about the stargazing habit of frogs, and uses its glowing eyes to mimic the stars and keep the frog unaware. See, frogs are pretty smart, and if a luminoid dove at them, blocking out the star with the wings, frogs would most times see that and hop away, spoiling the luminoid's hunt. But with those glowing eyes looking like 2 stars, the luminoids can often trick a target frog just long enough to spike and kill it. The frog doesn't see it coming. When Fangspew got back to the pond with the stick, he and Timos inserted it underneath the mud pile. Then Timos, with some skills in this field, carefully modeled a frog out of the pile of mud. It took him some time, and he had an appreciative audience, which he enjoyed. He wrapped up his artistry just as the sun was setting down. Fangspew gathered the volunteers, and they went over the plan once again. Then, all in readiness, he directed the volunteers to hide, and to hide well. Remember, we're trying to lure the spiked luminoid in on the mud frog, not on you. Make sure it will not be able to see you. So find a good spot, and then we'll all start talking about the stars, which you shouldn't be able to see because you've got such a good hiding place. But talk loudly. We want the luminoid to fall for this trap. He continued as the frogs hopped to their places. We normally enjoy the stars for an hour before bedtime, so I expect if the luminoid is going to strike, it will strike within the next hour. So be ready. A chorus of okays agreed to this, and the frogs scattered to the nearby bushes. The sun completed its disappearing act, the gray of dusk passed into darkness, and the stars began winking on. The frogs tuned up, and within minutes of full dark, the frogs were making a perfect racket. Would it be enough to draw in the spiked luminoid? Yes, it was. About 45 minutes of croaking, the frogs heard the rush of wind through wing feathers. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct enough to hear it amid the croaking. One frog peeked out from behind his fallen log and told the story afterwards. I saw the stars, of course, and looked toward the sound of the wind in the feathers. At first I saw nothing, but then picked it up because of the noise and the fact that it blocked out stars. The bird was maybe 100 feet up, hard to tell, and had 2 glowing starlight eyes. If it hadn't been for the noise, I'm not sure I could have picked it out from the starry background. Sure enough, the frog went on, it was aiming for the mud frog. It beat its wings at the last second to slow its descent, then speared the mud frog directly in the back. Gave a loud squawk, and that startled me so much I ducked back below my log. Turned out it was a good thing he did so. There was a squish noise as the spikes pierced the mud frog. and it would crack as the spikes hit the stick. The spikes went through the stick, and the luminoid, now aware that it had been tricked, beat its wings furiously to get out of the trap. The barbs on the luminoid's legs hooked the stick as the bird began to rise, and the stick pulled up through the mud frog as the bird struggled for altitude. The wet mud piled on the stick, like we mentioned earlier, but the stick wasn't big enough. As the bird's wings beat the air, the stick fractured lengthwise, splitting like an axe splits firewood, and the stick and the mud frog fell to earth. The spiked luminoid was free. It was at this time that another frog, a different one from the first watcher, decided to see how the trap was working. It hopped from underneath the bush where it had been hiding and froze. The luminoid was 3 feet above the ground and the stick was nowhere in sight. Luminoid saw the frog's movement, flapped 2 more beats, folded its wing and dove, speared the frog, lifted off again with the now lifeless frog hanging from the spikes. The bird departed, and the pond was quiet. No frogs croaked as they came out of their hiding places. There were some whispers, and even more tears. Fangspew gathered the frogs and gecko around himself. Folks, we'll talk about this in the morning, and if we figure something out we got to figure something out and get that luminoid. But for now, bed. The small group dispersed, heading to bed. Some did not sleep well. Several had nightmares. But most shook off the sudden death. Remember, as I've told you before, frogs view death differently than humans. For them, death is just another part of life. Morning came early for most of the frogs, as the majority had not slept well. Fangspew woke Bubbles up, and they rinsed off and ate in the pond. And then they hopped up the path to see T-Moss. Fangspew wanted to discuss last night's failure and figure out a new plan of attack. They met T-Moss at the base of his tree. He was coming to meet them, and so they made themselves comfortable there and went over what happened last night. It was not a pleasant time. Fangspew felt guilty that the frog had died, even though he was in no way at fault. He kept coming back to the stick. T-Moss, maybe a bigger stick would have worked. I'm sure we can find one, but I'll need help getting it to the pond. I can't do it by myself. Yeah, but if the stick splinters like last night, it doesn't matter how big it is. If it splinters, the luminoid will fly free again, and we're back to where we started. And Fangspew, it may not have been the stick that was the problem. Maybe I made the frog too heavy, and that weight caused the stick to break free. I could add less water and maybe make it small. No, said Fangspew. It has to be big enough so that he can see it. Maybe less water is a good idea, but the mud frog has to be the size you made it. Fangspew shifted on the tree root upon which he sat. Looked thoughtful. Bubbles, a random question. Aren't spiked luminoids territorial? Yes, said Bubbles, very much so. They don't tolerate other luminoids at all unless it's mating season, which is in the fall. Fangspew started to smile, and it was a devious one. Well, how about instead of a mud frog, we make a mud-spiked luminoid? T-Moss chuckled, liking the idea but seeing difficulties. It's one thing to make a frog that sits in the mud. It's quite another to make a bird that stands up. And how would I do the wings? Remember, T-Moss, that a real luminoid will see it from the air. From its perspective, it can't tell if it's standing. You won't need to make it feet, and it will be dark, just so a rough outline of its wings is all that we'll need, as well as its back and head. Think you can sculpt that? Is it possible? I'm going to want it big. Sure, I think so. But I'll need help with the size and dimensions, because I've only seen one last night, and it was flying. Oh, Bubbles and I can help with that, said Fangspew. Bubbles looked at Fangspew, a question in her eyes. What are you going to do with the shining eyes? Well, he responded, smiling again, I got an idea about those eyes, and we've got the brothers and sisters who can help me make it work. I'll get back to you on that. For now, T-Moss, can you start working on the bird? Bubbles, you go with him and help with the description. Big, too. Bigger than the one last night, okay? Both agreed and headed off down the path. Fangspew remained where he was, deep in thought. Then he followed them down the path, only getting halfway before running into 5 of his brothers who were out hunting flies. Brothers, I need some help. We need to capture some fireflies. Now, most people don't know, but frogs certainly do, that fireflies can be made to glow on command. Not that the frogs talk to them, but if a frog exhales on them, it triggers the glow response. Not sure if this works when done by humans. You'll have to try, let me know. But it works well when done by a frog. There's actually a frog game which involves glowing fireflies, but that's a story for a different time. So you can see Fangspew's plan. He needed a couple fireflies for the mudbird's eyes. Then he'd blow on them, they would glow, the real spiked luminoid would see the eyes and a large size of the fake bird and flee, never come back. It's a pretty clever idea. But getting fireflies is not an easy task. Since they are well hidden until dark, the frogs had to wait a bit. They hopped deeper into the woods, dusk comes earlier there, scouted out a clearing since fireflies often congregate at the edge of a clearing. Now, once seen, a firefly is easy for a frog to catch. The frog sits still until the glowing bug gets close, then thwack with the tongue, and the firefly is captured. The difficult part is not eating the fly once it's on the tongue. After all, fireflies are tasty. Fangspew needed just 2, but wanted 4 so as to have spares. They caught 20. The first 16 got eaten. Fangspew had to stand up on his hind legs and holler at his brothers to stop eating the doggone targets. Stop being slave to habit, you guys, and save some of them. A little yelling goes a long way, especially coming from Fangspew, who has a good reputation among his brothers. The next 4 were successfully caught, thwack, and spit out, picked up, and held gently. They had to keep the bugs alive. Dead ones won't glow. The successful hunting party hopped back to the pond where T-Moss was putting the finishing touches on the mudbird. He'd done a great job, helped by Bubbles. The bird was much bigger than the frog from last night. The wings were against the bird's body, and he had used small rocks for horns down the head and the back. Fangspew gathered the same frogs from last night, briefed them on the same rules, find good cover, croak when the stars come out, and whatever you do, do not come out yourself. The last was certainly unneeded since the lesson had been learned so vividly the last time. As the earth rotated the sun away, the frogs took their hiding places. T-Moss selected a different location this time, a hiding place halfway up a slender tree. He had an excellent vantage point from which to see the mudbird. The sun set. Stars came out. The frogs commenced their croaking, discussing and commenting over the beauty of the heavens. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, making it more difficult for the croaking frogs to hear a bird flying overhead. Nevertheless, the frogs strained to hear during the pauses in their star discussion. It should come as no surprise that the spiked luminoid came back to the scene of a successful hunt the night before. It hoped to repeat its good fortune, so about 45 minutes after sunset, the luminoid flew overhead, circled once above the chorus of croaking, then dove. To this day, the frogs do not know what the luminoid was diving on. It must have been the frog noise, but there were no frogs in view. Matter of fact, there was a bird in view, but that should have scared the luminoid off, not drawn it in. Maybe its vision was not as good as they supposed? Regardless of the reason, it did dive. All the frogs heard it. The wind whistled through the outstretched wings, big air brakes, getting louder and closer, and with the luminoid about 100 feet in the air, Fangspew hopped out from the cover of his bush, 2 fireflies in hand. He'd forgotten the one part of the trap that was absolutely vital to success. You already know this. Fangspew can hop. He can really move when needed, and at this point it was really needed. He took 3 long hops, landed beside the mudbird, stood up on his hind legs, stretched, survival part of his brain hollering, "Run!" Jabbed the legs of the 2 fireflies in the mud where the eyes would be if it had him, and exhaled. One lit. The other lit. Fangspew spun on his heels, the wind noise deafening, launched himself in what was likely the best 3 hops of his life back to his bush, and on the second hop, the noise spiked in volume and the wings thrashed the air. Spike Luminoid just realized it was diving on another Spike Luminoid with glowing eyes, and it was big, too big. The dive turned into a hover, which turned into a climb, a fast climb, as the luminoid reversed its direction and flew away as fast as it could. The frogs, still safely hidden, listened. No one croaked. The leaves rustled in the breeze. The fireflies glowed. Fangspew, still breathing heavily, hopped out of cover, looked skyward. Nothing. Others followed. T-Moss came down from the tree, walked over to Fangspew. "That was the bravest and the stupidest thing you've ever done." Fangspew ignored him, and in a stage whisper said to the frogs, "Start croaking. Come on. Start croaking like nothing happened to make sure it's really gone, and get back under cover." So for the next 15 minutes they did. More frog commentary on the stars, more listening for wind in the wings rather than wind through the leaves. And nothing. Just the breeze and the leaves. Peaceful. The frog croaking slowly tapered off, and they began hopping out from their hiding spots. They gathered around the mudbird, smiling and joking as the tension drained away. T-Moss and Fangspew shook hands. Fangspew reached up to the eye sockets and released the bird and released the fireflies. They buzzed off, happily glowing in the dark. The Spike Luminoid never came back. That's the end of 14, and I was wrong. There actually is a bonus chapter called Chapter 15, Summer Solstice. And we'll read that tomorrow. Thanks, you guys. See you later.